Yes, I can do it. I hope that everyone can see the screen. Just carry this down here. Everyone can see it. Okay, let me start. So thanks for seeing this presentation. My name is Thomas Greve. I'm from Ischia. It is a Portuguese university, and I'm from MIT as well. And I'm presenting today a paper called Information Overload in a First Prize Auction, which is a study of the effect of excess information, if excess amount of information in a first prize auction, to see what is the effect of adding to a certain amount, asking the participants, the bidders, to deliver an excess amount of information in a first prize auction. So what do I mean by a excess information? There is a huge literature on excess information in not specific to auctions, but in general. So it could be, for example, the excess information of using the internet, receiving emails, TV channels, newspapers, in news in general, for example. So there is scholars are not it's not clear in the definition of information overload, which is, for example, here I take one example from CLAP 1986, which defined information overload as an amount of high rate of information act like noise when the reads overload. A rate too high for the receiver to process efficiently without distraction, stress, increasing errors, or other costs making information poorer. So in other words, you receive a lot of information at the same time, so you get stressed over the amount of information received. So I'm going to use this definition in my paper. So let me scroll down. I'm using a framework of procurement tenders. So when governments are selling public contracts for bidders to bid on, to be able to deliver. So I'm building it up in two stages. So first you ask the bidders. So for example, if you're building a highway, for example, you're asking the bidders to provide a number of in deep information regarding your economic or financial standing, funding solution, risk management, technical plans, or other things. So the government knows how you want to build the bridge, what financial capacity you have to do it, if there is problems at a certain point. Can you handle this exam, or does the government need to intervene and provide you money? So if you have the financial standards to actually build the bridge. So the government are asking you or the bidders to provide a certain amount of information about that, so they'll be sure that if you win the contract, you can actually build the bridge. So that one part. The other part is that you also need to provide some kind of cost. So you need to be compensated for the cost. So if it cost you $200 million to build the bridge, you need to be sure that the bidders get the money compensated for at the end of the project, either over the years or upfront. So you're submitting bids on two variables. One is the amount of information that you're asked to deliver about the project itself, but also cost you need to be compensated for. Usually, or very standard, is that you determine the winner and its payment or the compensation via a first prize auction. So these are the two parts of the model. So I will just take each of them separately. So let me take the information overload, or the information provided information of what the market is saying about that. So there have been several studies out there. I've taken a short sample size here, which, for example, the Northern Islands, they have made a study. They have provided, they have done the tenders, and they have asked the bidders afterwards, how was the tender for you? Was it complicated? Was it straightforward, and so on? And apparently, what was the response to the government Northern Ireland was that there was too much information. The governments were asking too much information. I mean, if the questions were duplicated over the questionnaire. So that was one interesting outcome of that study. Canada had a similar study after procuring vessels. The bidders or the participants were asking what do they think about this tender, and they said that there was they needed to provide too much information, and much of the information was it was overly complex questionnaires. Scotland and Australia had similar issues in there when they were asking their bidders. They said it was too little standardization of questions. So that's just a taste of what is the effect of asking the bidders a certain amount of information to be part of the tender. So it's of course it's understandable if they want bidders to build a bridge, you need to ask them some information about what can you do for if something happens. Are you covered very well with financial? Have you financial capacity to actually build a bridge if something happens? But apparently, according to the bidders, not surprising, of course, is that the governments are asking for certain information, and maybe too much information, and it's a question for repeated. And I'm going to use that in my auction. Does it have an effect of asking to this a certain amount of information? So that's one part of the presentation of the data we need to have in mind. The first price auction is one of the most used format in public tenders. So what is it? It's usually for auctioning a single project. It's a sealed bid. That means that you're handling an envelope. You're not bidding like in Sotheby's and Christie where you're writing your hand, but you're handling an envelope with your bid, the compensation that you need to build the bridge. I'm running this paper. This motivation is procurement. That means that you're bidding for cost instead to be compensated. So the lowest cost bidder is the one that wins the project, is compensated according to the bid submitted. So if you submit a bid of 200 million euros, you get compensated for 200 million euros or dollars, for that sake. There are a couple of issues that are very interesting in theory. The optimal bid is requiring information about the other bidders. So one of the issues is that to calculate an optimal bid, you need to know something about the other bidder's bid, and especially the distribution of values. So you need to put some kind of expectations in for the expected bid of the other bidders. The interesting part is that it incentivizes a non-truthful bid in the auction. So the bidders are not submitting true value. They shade a bid, as we call it. So if you have true cost of $200 million, then of course you're better off if you get compensated for $250 million or $300 million. So they had incentive to shade their bids. And this is the two things that I'm taking into this model that I want to investigate. So my research questions are these two here. What is the impact of information overload on the outcome of a first price auction? That is question number one. Is it possible to ensure truth-telling in a first price auction if the principal, as I call it, for example, the government uses the strategy of asking for an excessive amount of information to be submitted in the tender? So So I'm looking at these two things here. So I'm taking information overload and being part of the bidding process in a first price auction to see if I can incentivize the bidders to submit true cost. So instead of shading, asking for 250 million, if my true cost is 200 million, I will see if I can get them to actually submit the $200 million by using an assess of amount of information. So the main literature, I've just taken a short sample size, but these are the main three main papers. So Dekel and Walensky, 2003, have studied the auction and see how close they can come to truth telling. They're using the framework of that I'm using, the very standard framework, interdependent and private values, and to see what can we do. They're not using information that is very specific to my model. They get very close to the true value. So that move a little bit the standard textbook outcome of the first prize auction. So Barling and Netzer in 2016 for Games and Economic Behavior study also at first prize a sealed bid auction, but they add a bonus to it. And they actually show that they can incentivize the bidders to submit true bids if they are adding the bonus of actually telling the truth. It's not a unique equilibrium. And there's still the bonus depend on the distribution of the other bidders' value. So so that is definitely the closest paper to mine. Che, 1983, studied a so-called multidimensional auction where other parameters than price is part of the auction format. So he's studying a first prize sealed bid auction as this one, with the opportunity to submit true value. But he add an additional element to the allocation function, where he actually implement the optimal outcome, which he used as a benchmark as the valuation mechanism. The reason why my paper is also close to Chi's model is that I'm using two parameters in the auction. So one parameter is the information that I ask the bidders to submit, but also the price by itself. So it has a smell of a multidimensional auction as well, but it's definitely Barling and Netzer that is closest to this paper here. So my contribution is that the framework that I'm using, asking the bidders to submit information together with a price, actually induce them to a unique equilibrium where truth telling is an optimal strategy. The interesting part is that I don't need a knowledge about the distribution of the other bidders. So where the remaining paper, especially the two first papers, that the paper that I shown before was that they actually need an idea about the distribution of the other bidders' value. I don't need that. I still get my truth telling, and it's a unique equilibrium. So it's a very interesting paper that I can use information to incentivize that. So let me try to explain the model now. So we have on one side, we have the principal, the auctioneer, the government, as we call it. I just call him principal. And then we have a number of bidders. So let me just start with the principal. So the principal is asking the bidders to submit bid, to propose. So I'm building it up in two stages. So first, I'm trying to build a framework, which end up with a proposition where I use the valuation principle just as a benchmark, and then I go to the auction afterwards. So in first place, I'm asking them to propose a cost and deliver information to deliver the project. So the objective of the principle is to be sure that the agents reports true cost, so no shading in the model. A part of the consistency of the information. So the whole idea is that the principle is asking the bidders to submit two things. One thing is the information, and one thing is a cost to be compensated for. What the principle is using the information for is to look for consistency. So let's assume that the bidders, the principal is asking the bidders to submit 1,000 questions in a questionnaire. So, and it's questions are duplicated around the questionnaire. So if the principals just spot out that there is one consistency from question 4 to question 2005 to question 3015, if there is any consistency in there, the bidder is excluded from the tender. He's using two parameters. So one parameter is that how importance I place on the information. If I'm asking a lot of information, that means I consider the principal considers very important. And then there's parameter E, which is the parameter for complexity. So the higher E, the higher complexity. The principal evaluates the agents later on bidder on these two parameters, B and I. And the information is obtained via this questionnaire. So back what I said before, the bidders are asked to deliver a number of information via this questionnaire. Where the number of pages, number of questions can be thousands of questions, and they can be reduplicated all over the questionnaire. The utility of the principles is based on these two parameters. So there's a value function V, which is where the questions are where the information is evaluated on, which has this level of importance. So the higher omega, the higher value the principal plays on the information, and it has to pay the compensation scheme. This is why there's a minus on. And I have assumed that the V is concave, which is very, very standard in this framework here. The agents can be N agents, where just I is one of them. I will skip the I later on, but it's just to not run around with this I all the time. So the profit of agent I is based on the compensation minus the cost of building the bridge. The type of the agent is private information, which I'm adding with the delta with the theta value, and it's independently and identical distributed over an underscore and an upper bar of theta, according to the distribution function. Also very, very standard. Now the interesting part now when the information overload starts now to take its place. So the cost of the agent is based on this first equation. So there's a C1 and a pi. C1 is the true cost of delivering the project, and pi is the degree of shading. So I have a cost of building the bridge, and then I have an amount of shading above. Each agent is operating under a mental capacity constraints. So if the auctioneer was only asking, or the principal was only asking for 1 or 2 questions, it would be very easy to shade in there, because changing around with 1 or 2 questions is pretty easy to spot out. But if there suddenly are thousands of questions, then it becomes a little bit more complicated. So at a certain point, the bidders become so confused over so many questions, and they need to remember that question 4 is the same, reformulated, but the same as question 2003, which is the same as 3024. So at a certain point, it becomes so complex. So the agents are getting confused, and that is what I'm using in here. So at a certain point, the cost is given first by a cost I, added the type of the bidders, but at a certain point it becomes so complex to take over of the H, which is where I define the information overload. So when I theta, which is the line where a bidders get confused, where a bidder hit this information overload. So this is the borderline. So this is the cost. I'm using a benchmark, the optimal revelation mechanism given by these 2 points, where especially the compensation is the interesting part. So the first part is there is a cost, and then there is the line part or the shading part given by the integral. And this is why you will see at the end of the paper that I hit exactly this one down here. So remember these two equations here. They will be important at the end. So we have a first price auction. So before it was the revelation principle, it was just a benchmark case. But now I start with my auction. So the auctioneer, the principal is asking the bidders to submit, before bidders were agents, asking to submit bids on I and B. And allocation rule is given by the utility presented before, where V is the value of information and the omega, added the omega on, minus the compensation. And each of the bidders is assigned a point. So the one that gets the highest point is the one that wins the auction. And it's given the payment B, the submitted bid. So I'm back to my first price auction here. I have a second proposition. It should be possible for the bidders to submit the optimal bid given by the intersection between the isocost line and the isoquant line. But I'm running around with this importance, this omega. So I need to be sure that the bidders are possible to calculate each of the optimal bids. So for this proposition shows that each of the bidders can actually calculate the optimal bid at each omega. So I just need to be sure that I'm running around with a variable that each of the bidders can actually calculate the optimal outcome. And this is what proposition shows. I just skipped the proof here, but this is what it says. So I'm just simplify the setup of the model. The model can be done very generally. So this is just to make the paper a little bit more understandable. So I'm introducing a linear cost function given by I, which is increasing up to my information overload, or what I define as I theta. At a certain point, when I reach that point, cost increases rapidly. I would still have my bidders, which is their net gain. They have to maximize their net gain, which is given by B minus my theta I. And this is and I still have my principal, which is the one that is given by their utility function. So now introducing the information overload and the effect of information overload. So now listen very carefully. So here I'm adding so much information. I'm using my E variable to add so much information, so the marginal revenue is increasing much higher than the marginal cost of the bidders. And that is what it's explained down there. So the marginal utility of the highest cost bidder is greater than the marginal cost of the bidder. So I'm simply just pushing up the amount of information that I need the agents to deliver. This is what I define down here. So my proposition 3 shows here that in a symmetric equilibrium with the utility function U and the evaluation function B, if I start with B first in proposition 3, it shows that if this condition holds, that the marginal value is greater than the marginal cost of the highest cost bidder, defined by theta upper bar. I have a unique equilibrium where I hit exactly the information overload. If this doesn't hold, the bidders, the auction have a multi-equilibria defined as several Bayesian-Nash equilibria. I have the proof here, which is also in the appendix, but I can very fast go through. So I start by proposing that the amount of information is below the information overload. Using the values of my theta, omega, and V, I can show that V is greater than this one here, but that contradict my what I have in the proposition, meaning that it hits exactly the information overload, what I define as information overload. So the last proposition of the model, I add an additional parameter, delta, which is equal to the hazard rate. If I add that, so you can see in proposition 4 in line 2 here, that I have the same equation that I had in proposition 3, just added a delta. But you can see here, I'm just pushing the marginal value even higher than the marginal cost plus the delta. So I haven't done anything different than what I did before, just adding the marginal value even higher. And I can show that the outcome of this model is exactly equal to my proposition 2, the optimal revelation mechanism. So a very short proof, a very short, where I just pass the proof very fast here, is that I first define that the delivered information is less than is different from the information overload. I'm using my equations, my assumptions for the proposition, and for value of I can show that this is greater or equal to the delta plus the hazard rate. If I let this go arbitrarily small, if I go my information is closer to the information overload, I can show that these are exactly the equal. But that was exactly the value of the information of the marginal revenue and marginal value in proposition 2, meaning that the outcome of the first price auction is exactly the same at information overload as the optimal revelation mechanism. Ergo, they're telling the truth. So just to sum up here, so a bidder can share its bid and gain higher profit. We saw that with proposition 3A. But the principle can increase the flexibility, the complexity to such an abnormal high level, which is the marginal value higher, greater than the marginal cost of the highest cost bidder plus this additional value. Means that the bidders need to will choose to spend all the capacity up to their max to read the information overload, which transform into them to meeting the true value, the true bid. So this was the paper itself. There is the in the appendix there is the proof of proposition 2, 3, and 4. So if there is any questions for that, then I will be more than happy to explain this also. So do ask the question if you have anything. You can also find my email address online if you want, but I can also show it. Should have written on the slides, of course, but my email address is my name with a dot, Thomas Greve, just write it here, my university, PT. So these are my email address if you want to send me any questions. So thanks for listening, and I hope you have a good conference.